This morning I had a quick look at the newspapers, and what do you think is the first thing that I saw? Front page of the Telegraph, Putin declares that Russia is ready for war with Europe. Brilliant. What a bizarre and equally terrifying prospect that is. The idea that there could be a third world war in Europe in which countless young men die for basically nothing. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, the prospect of peace, the prospect of war, and what exactly I would do in the very unlikely event that that actually does take place. Let's rewind just for a second and take a look at how we got here. This war has been going on for the last 4 years, but about a year ago Trump was re-elected, and since then he's been on a bit of a crusade to bring peace to the world. He's definitely hunting that Nobel Peace Prize. And look, he's been successful in various different conflicts, but Ukraine has really been the sticking point. So the latest thing from the Trump administration is a 28-point peace plan, which he has put forward to both Russia and Ukraine. Now, if I'm completely honest, this peace plan is pretty generous to the Russians. And yet, surprisingly, Zelensky has said that he supports the spirit of it, if not the exact detail. As well as that, just yesterday there were peace talks in Moscow between the US and Russia. And of course, Ukrainians weren't represented there, but hopefully the US understands their position and is sort of lobbying on their behalf to a certain extent. We don't really know because we don't know what's said during these talks. But all of that sounds quite positive, right? Well, not so fast, because just 2 days ago, the Telegraph put out an article about how NATO are considering preemptive strikes into Russia. And within that article, there are several quotes from the NATO chair of the military committee, who is an Italian admiral, and I'm going to read you one of them, just so you know that I'm not making this up. He said, "Being more aggressive or proactive is something we are thinking about. A preemptive strike could be considered a defensive action." Okay, look, to me, sending a few missiles into Russia from NATO is not a defensive action. I don't really know how you can swing that and how you can sell that. To me, that looks like you're trying to instigate a third world war, which, forgive me guys, but I just really don't want that to happen. Maybe that's an extreme position these days, but yeah, call me a pacifist, call me a peace-loving hippie, I'm not down for that. Now, I think this is why Putin came out and felt like he had to deliver a message to the Europeans, and this is what he said.
I've said that 100 times. We have no plans of fighting against Europe. But if Europe wants to fight and they start this fight, then we are ready right now. There is no doubt about this. But the only question is, if Europe starts the war.
That is tough talk, but let's just be clear for a second about exactly what Vladimir Putin said there. He said, "We don't want to go to war with Europe, but it looks a little bit like Europe wants to go to war with us, and if they do, we are ready." And I'm going to leave it to the viewer to determine how much they take Vladimir Putin at his word. That's not why I bring this up, though. I bring this up to take a look at some of our newspaper headlines and kind of call them out and shame them a little bit, because front page of the Telegraph went with this: "Putin ready for war with Europe as he attacks peace deal," which, let's be honest, is not quite what he said, is it? I mean, it is. He did say that Russia is ready for war with Europe, but they've omitted quite an important piece of context there, in which he said we really don't want to go to war with Europe. By omitting that part, it sensationalizes the whole thing, and it kind of scares people into thinking that, oh, yeah, Putin's like just around the corner from rolling tanks towards Berlin, which is really very clearly not what he said. So yes, I think they've sensationalized it. They've done it to sell newspapers. Do I think this is bad? Yes. Am I probably going to do something similar with the title of this video? Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that I am particularly concerned to hear these developments, because like I've said before on the channel, I used to be in the British Army and I'm still young enough to be drafted. So if there's a third world war, they're going to try and send me, right? And look, I am generally concerned about the prospect of a third world war, because I think that would be catastrophic, and ultimately the vast majority of wars have both sides losing tremendously, even the victor. However, I'm not personally concerned because I will not be going. I'm not signing up for trench warfare because Keir Starmer wants me to. Never in a million years. Now, I will say this, it would be different if Russia had come to England and they were attacking the English here, then yeah, sure, because fighting Russians would then be fighting for England, and that's noble. But what I'm not willing to do is go thousands of miles away, right onto the border with Russia, or even into it, to fight against Russian people for what? For a globalist political class who've got stocks and shares in Lockheed Martin and BAE? Yeah, never happening. So my message to those people is send the communists that you've groomed in this country, send the new Brits that you've brought in from North Africa and the Middle East, and send your own sons. Now, do I think there's a realistic prospect of peace in Ukraine within, say, the next 6 months? I'd probably guess like 50-50. And I'm not going to pretend to you that I'm an expert in these matters, right? But let me just explain my rationale. We've had lots and lots of peace talks in the past, and they have all fallen through. They haven't really got all that far. So that would immediately make you think, well, it's not going to happen this time either. But there are a few salient differences, because now you've got America putting sufficient pressure on Zelensky and the Ukrainians, sometimes in a quite public and unpleasant way, to bring them towards the negotiating table and get Zelensky saying, yes, we need some kind of peace deal, and I agree with the spirit of what Trump has proposed. Okay. At the same time, the 28-point peace plan that America's put to Russia is actually quite generous towards them in many respects. So I think this is the closest that the two parties have been to some kind of agreement for a long time, but I still wouldn't hold my breath. And the reason I say that is because even though these two countries have got so much in common, you know, not quite language, but pretty close, not quite religion, but pretty close, cultural ties, share a border, even though these two countries have so much in common, when you've been at war for 4 years, there is so much anger, resentment, and hatred that it's going to be difficult to get these two people, these two groups of people, to come to terms with each other. I can't imagine a world in which Zelensky and Putin ever are in the same room. I just can't imagine that. So, look, I would like to see peace, but I'm not exactly holding my breath for it. The other question, of course, that I posed at the start of this video is, could there be a war between Russia and Europe? And I certainly hope not, because it would be a catastrophe. And I don't think that Russia would start anything like that in the near future. Why do I say that? Well, I'm not saying it because I think Putin is a trustworthy, noble, upstanding, honest guy, and that he's all around just benevolent. No, I'm saying it because I think Russia has been degraded and fatigued by their war with Ukraine. You've got to remember, this was only meant to take about a week. They immediately went to seize Kiev, and they couldn't get a hold of it. And now this week-long war has been going on for 4 years. And in that time, they faced sanctions. So their economy has been damaged, hasn't been crippled as bad as some people would like to imagine, but it has been damaged. They've lost a lot of material, military equipment, soldiers, morale. So the reason that I don't think Russia is likely to start some kind of conflict against Europe is because it would simply be biting off more than they can chew at the moment. If they could, you know, realistically stack up against Europe and NATO, then they would have already completely crushed Ukraine. The fact that they haven't tells you that they're really not in a good position to start that kind of trouble. So yes, I think it's very unlikely. I don't think Russia would start it. I also don't think NATO would start something like that, because why? I mean, it's just absurd. But then again, you never know. There could be some wild card Italian admiral sat in NATO who thinks that it's a fantastic idea to lob a few missiles at Moscow, which it isn't. That's a terrible idea. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Let me finish by saying this. I really, really hope that they can make some kind of peace agreement and draw this war to an end. I don't want this to become a decade or multi-decade long thing. And I know people on the left keep saying, oh, no, Ukraine needs to keep fighting forever. But for what? There's no momentum in this war at all. The battle lines haven't changed for the last 2 or 3 years. So what exactly is it that you want them to keep fighting for? If they were making advancements, if there was momentum, if they were pushing the Russians back at a rate of like 10 miles per week or even 10 miles per month, I would say, yeah, sure, okay, that makes sense. But for the last 3 years, the battle lines have just been perfectly static. It's only the death toll that increases. So what is it you want them to keep fighting for? If you ask me, we should let the young men of Ukraine decide what they want, and equally the young men of Russia, although bizarrely, despite the fact they're the ones doing all the heavy lifting, you know, they're not really going to get a say in it. I have kind of changed my mind about war over the last few years. You know, when I was a young man, I joined the army and I really wanted to go to war. Most young men who join the army do, right? They've got that sense of adventurous spirit. And, you know, they think it's very patriotic, and in many cases it would be. In many cases it would be completely justifiable. But for me, seeing what happened in Afghanistan, the fall of Kabul, kind of disillusioned me to that, you know. 20 years, I know a lot of people who served in Afghanistan. I know some people who were injured in Afghanistan. I know a lot of people who have friends and stories of friends and how they lost their lives in Afghanistan. So for me, seeing Afghanistan fall back to the Taliban and being basically identical to how it was in 2000 before we went there, just kind of made me realize that actually it's very, very pointless. No one really gained anything out of that. I do think the initial invasion, by the way, was perfectly justified. Of course it was, because of what happened in 9/11. But after the first year or two, once you've cleared Al-Qaeda out of the country, I mean, what are you still there for? A 20-year program of nation building to try and make Afghanistan into a Western liberal democracy? So bizarre, right? So yeah, I've become a bit more pessimistic about war, and I think the majority of wars are pointless and not really justified. Even the victors tend to come out having lost, and that'll be the case whatever happens with this war as well. So yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm giving you my deepest inner thoughts about war in general. It's not good, is it? Right, thank you very much for watching. Please do leave a like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in a future video. Thank you very much.